Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about 23 books that I want to read in 2023. I have been doing this list for myself personally for, maybe like the last 5 years, just writing it down in my book journal. And then for the last couple of years that I've been making booktube videos, I have also made a video about this very topic. I am not always the most successful in getting through these books. So these are kind of like a rough early priority list for the books that I really want to get to over the course of the year. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for me, over the course of the year, I know that I will discover new releases. There will be buddy reads that I want to join in on. Alan will do a review of a book that I've never heard of, but he's so enthusiastic about that I need to put it on my TBR immediately. Like, there are just inevitabilities in life. And inevitably, all of those things are going to happen. And so these 23 books, which is a very reasonable number for someone who usually reads about 100-ish books a year, becomes something unattainable because there are so many other books that keep getting piled on the TBR. But I still really like to do this list. I like to think about it, to put it together, because it starts getting me excited about books that I have been thinking about or books that I own. And spoiler alert for my end of the year videos, one of my goals for 2023, which is the same as my goal in 2022, is to read through the physical books that I own. I'm going to try to be very intentional about buying books in 2023, which is to say, I am hoping to limit that significantly and get through the physical books that I own because I bought them because I'm excited about them. And when I made up this list of 23 books, I think there are 4 on this list that I don't own. So of the 23, there are only 4 that I don't presently have in my possession. So reading through this will mean cutting through a pretty big chunk of that unread physical TBR. But I will get into it because it's going to take a little bit of time to go through 23 books. I honestly put this together at the table without thinking. Like, in an ideal world, I would have formatted it to be like fantasy books, classics, literary fiction, put them all together. I didn't. It was just off the top of my head. I was thinking, what do I own? What am I most excited to read? So it is just a hodgepodge of books that hopefully you will be interested in listening to. The very first one, and it's no surprise that this came out at the top of the list because I am coming off the heels of reading Augustus by John Williams. It's a book that Alan from the Library of Alexandria and a bunch of people read last month and loved. I had hoped to read it with them, but I just had a lot of things that I was reading and doing. And so I didn't get to it until this month. And spoiler alert for my December wrap up, I loved it. As soon as I read it, I knew that I wanted to read more by this author. And when I checked my want to read on Goodreads, I had actually shelved one of his books a couple of years ago, pre-booktube. So I have no idea where I heard about it or who recommended it to me. But that book is Stoner. So this is a book that I have heard a lot of people talk about lately because on booktube, a lot of people have been talking about John Williams lately. But it is one that I now particularly would like to get to because I enjoyed Augustus so much. Not even really sure what Stoner is about. I know one of John Williams' other books was a Western. So I also clicked want to read on that one last night when I was, logging my information into Goodreads. But I think I will start off with Stoner because that seems to be another one that people really love. I know that Joanna said that she really loved it, and Stoner and Augustus together have cemented John Williams as her favorite non-sci-fi fantasy author, which is pretty high praise. So I really would like to read it. I would like to get through it, and it is number 1 on this list for next year. After that, we have a classic, which is Jude the Obscure by Tom Hardy. This is one that I have agreed to buddy read with my friend Penny. She really enjoys classics. I enjoy classics, and I have owned Jude the Obscure for a long time. I read Tess of the D'Urbervilles in university in I think it was my 3rd year of university. I did a course about literature between, what was it? Like 1500 and 1900 or something. I don't remember what the exact dates were, but it was not medieval literature. It was not modern. It was somewhere in that time period. And Tess of the D'Urbervilles was one of the books that my professor had selected. And I ended up really liking it. It was interesting and like a lot of interesting cultural things about the book that reflect the differences in society between, at the time this was written and the time that I was reading it. And I don't know if it was, I really loved this professor. So I don't know if it was just his passion about the book that made me like it so much, but listening to him talk about books always made me like them more, even if I didn't like them that much when I had finished them. So I immediately went out and bought other things by Tom Hardy, but I never did read Jude the Obscure, and I would like to. So I'm going to buddy read that with my friend Penny. Hopefully we will both enjoy it. After that, there is An Immense World, and I believe the author's name is Ed Young. He wrote the book I Contain Multitudes, which is a scientific nonfiction about gut bacteria. It actually might just be about like microbes in general, but I think there's a lot of focus on the gut. And I really loved that when I listened to it a couple of years ago. I think this may have been pre-BookTube, but I'm not 100% sure. But I listened to it, and it ended up being like one of my most surprising books of the year. I really, really loved it. And this is his newest work of nonfiction, and I think it's about like undiscovered things about the animal kingdom and about, all of the different varieties of organisms and what they do and how they impact the world. Regardless, I really liked his first book. I'm sure that I will like this one. It's gotten a lot of good early buzz, and I want to read it. So it's on the list for 2023. That is one of the ones that I don't own, but it's one that I think, listen to on audio anyway. So it's one that I'll probably pick up with an Audible credit at some time in 2023. After that, we have The Monster's Bones, which is a book about the fossil rush, I believe. It's about dinosaur bones, but I think there is a fairly large chunk that is dedicated to the fossil rush. So for anyone who doesn't know, there was a big competition. There was a lot of competition around the discovery of fossils when dinosaur fossils were first becoming something that people knew about in the US. And it ties in with other things that I like. So I really enjoy Westerns. I enjoy that theming, reading about the American West, about prospecting, those kinds of things. And the dinosaur bone rush kind of fits into that thematically. And I have read other books that center around this. The book, The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, which is an excellent nonfiction about dinosaurs, if you're interested, has a little section about the people who were involved. I think one of them is Othniel Marsh, maybe. His name is Marsh. I think it might be Copeland and Marsh were the two paleontologists / businessmen who were involved in this. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure if those names are 100% correct. It's been a couple of years since I read that book, but regardless, I was very intrigued by the idea of the dinosaur rush. Then there was the book Dragon's Teeth, which was one of the posthumous books that had been published by Michael Crichton's family, one of his undiscovered manuscripts. I read it. I enjoyed it. That was the topic of that book as well, but it just made me super interested in this whole idea of the dinosaur bones rush, this competition to be the person to discover them. Your university is backing this person. The other university is backing this person. It was very cutthroat. So I'm looking forward to reading The Monster's Bones when we get down to it. I like dinosaurs. I like that topic. Gonna read that book. Then we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Have not read The Martian, have not seen The Martian, have not read Project Hail Mary. I feel like this is a big gap in my modern sci-fi oeuvre. So I would like to be able to fill that in. I want to read something by Andy Weir, and I have the audiobook for Project Hail Mary, which I've heard really good things about. So I am hopeful that I'm going to get to that one soon. My Audible TBR is very short. I think I only have 4 books on Audible that I haven't listened to. One of them is Anna Karenina, which I got for free. Who knows how long that'll sit there before I listen to it. But what I'm trying to say is I'm actually quite proud of my Audible TBR. I really only buy one. Well, I only get one a month because I only get 1 credit a month, and I listen to about 1 or 2 a month. So I'm able to make it through pretty quickly. After that, we have The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. I'm assuming it's Cavalier and not Cavalier or anything like that because it's an American book. But this is a past Pulitzer Prize winning book that is about, I believe, a comic book artist. But when I did my video earlier this year about accessible Pulitzer Prize winning novels. This is one that a lot of people had said was their favorite, and I've owned it for a couple of years and never gotten to it, but I think it is one that I could really like. I actually had it on my 5-star predictions video, which went up a couple of months ago, and I'm hoping that this will be a book that I can read early in 2023 so I can revisit those 5-star predictions. But this is a work of literary fiction that I had been hoping to get to for a really long time, so I'm going to really try to prioritize it in 2023. After that, we have Never Die by Rob J. Hayes, I believe is the author. This is a book, again, that I have owned for about a year or so, and one that I really want to read. It's a short little thing. I'm really hopeful that I can get that in at the beginning of the year. I've heard great things. I know that a couple of my good friends on Discord have really enjoyed it, so I really want to get to that one soon. After that, this is another one of the ones that I don't own. This book is called Nocturne by Alyssa Wiese. So this is, spoiler alert for my anticipated books of 2023, this is a new release that is coming out in 2023 that melds fantasy with ballet. So I don't know if I've ever talked about this. I think I have talked about it like very briefly in the past, but I had a period of time, like a really long period actually, from the time that I was really little into my teenage years where I was obsessed with ballet. Never wanted to be a ballet dancer. I mean, like probably I did want to be a ballet dancer, like at in some part of my brain. I'm not a very coordinated person, so I would never have been a ballet dancer, but I just love the beauty and like the raw power that is associated with ballet, like how hard it is on your body and how determined people have to be, how passionate they have to be in order to pursue a future in ballet. It just seems like only really badass people can become ballet dancers. And so it has always appealed to me for that like intersection of power and beauty. And so when there are books about ballet dancers, I almost always read them, and I have enjoyed most of the ones that I have read because I like reading about ballet. But this one is fantasy meets ballet, so I am super excited. This is the only book that I've pre-ordered for 2023, but I really don't want to forget about it, and I really want to read it as soon as it comes out. So it's on this list. Hopefully I will read it as soon as I get it. After that, we have Blackwing by I think Ed McDonald. I should really start writing like the authors' names down on this. But this is a book that Alan over at the Library of Alexandria read last year, I think, and really enjoyed. And he compared it to The Gunslinger by Stephen King. So as soon as he said that, I was like, this is a book that I need to read. I just didn't get to it in 2022. I asked for it for Christmas, so I imagine it will be a book that I own in 2023, and I will be able to read it then. After that, we have The Privilege of the Sword by Ellen Kushner. So Ellen Kushner wrote the book Swords Point, which is a book that I really, really love. It is a very low fantasy. The only thing fantastical about it is that it's not set on Earth. It takes place in a fictional place, but there's no magic. It's about court politics and sword fighting. There's a very explosive, emotionally intense relationship at the center of the book, and it's just really fun. It's super interesting. When I read it a really long time ago, and it was number one the first time that I had ever read a fantasy book that had a bisexual person as the main character. So that blew my mind a little bit back then when I first read it. And it was just unlike any other fantasy book that I had read at the time, and I ended up really enjoying it. There are 2 companion novels, the first of which is The Privilege of the Sword. So I would really love to continue on and read all of them, but I am putting one of them on this list because I'm trying to be realistic about these things. After that, we have Never Die Again, which is why I should check these over before I make the list, because if I don't, then I put the same book as number 7 and number 11. But we can throw another one in there because I was just thinking about this morning. And I also would really like to read Infinite Jest. So there was a friend of mine on Discord who read Infinite Jest this year. And as they were reading it, they were talking about it, how much they liked it. And it reminded me that it is a book that I have always wanted to read, that I have been terrified to read. It is one of the most intimidating books that has been on my long-term TBR. It is a modern work of literary fiction, for anyone who doesn't know, that is supposed to be very dense, very difficult, very hard to make it through, but ultimately very rewarding if you do manage to read it. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that I do read Infinite Jest next year and that I understand it and that I have a good time with it. All right, we had to take a pause because people got home from school, but I will continue on. After that, number 12, we have An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors. This is a book that a couple of people had read on Discord earlier this year, and I think Leslie over at the Nerdy Narrative has read this and talked about it and, has said, like, why aren't more people reading this? And when my friends on Discord were talking about it, I immediately went to Amazon and bought the Kindle version and then was like, why did you do that? Like, it was very impulsive. I just heard about it. I was like, immediately, I need to buy it. I just need to click it and buy it. And I did. I had no room on my TBR to read it. I don't have any space to read it in December, but it sounded so good. And I don't even remember what it was about now. So I can't tell you a whole lot about it. I apologize for, poor show in this video, but I do really want to read it. It's sitting there on my Kindle. I've heard that it's very fast paced. It's got interesting characters, very fun to get through. Hopefully I'll enjoy it. But it's here on the list now. After that, we have The King of Elfland's Daughter, which is by, what is his name? Lord someone. I don't remember. I apologize. But this is one of the foundational fantasy books that I have not read. So last year I read, oh gosh, what is the one that I read that Neil Gaiman loves? Oh, Blood in the Mist. So I read Blood in the Mist. I read the one by the guy who wrote The Princess and the Goblin. This video is really taking a turn for the worst right now. I'm going to blame it on my brain not being recovered from the cold. But regardless, I have read a couple of the major foundational works of fantasy that I wanted to read. And The King of Elfland's Daughter is one of the ones that I have not. So that is on the list. Hopefully I can get to that in 2023. After that, number 14, we have The Priory of the Orange Tree. This is a giant, chunky fantasy that I bought at the recommendation of one of my preceptors in residency. So when I was still completing my residency, which I have been finished for the last 3 years, one of my professors had said, or one of the doctors I was working under said, oh, you like fantasy? I really liked The Priory of the Orange Tree. And I was like, great, I'll read it. So I went to the bookstore and it was this giant fantasy book with a beautiful cover. So I said, you know what? I'll pick it up. And I haven't gotten to it. This one seems to be very divisive. Some people love it. Some people hate it. But there is a prequel coming out in 2023. So I figure if I read this one and I enjoy it, then I can pick up the equally beautiful prequel and read that. Okay, we had to take another quick coughing break, but I'm back. So after that, number 15, we have Magic's Pawn, which is by Mercedes Lackey, who is a female fantasy author I have read nothing from. And this is the book of hers that I have on Kindle. It must have come up in a Kindle sale, and then I picked it up while it was on sale. I'm not really sure what it's about. It looks like there's a unicorn on the cover, according to the picture that I looked at on my Kindle. But I couldn't tell you what it's about. It's just a work of classic fantasy, an author of classic fantasy that I've never gotten around to reading, so I would really like to. After that, we will go back into the classics for a moment with Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I had, until recently, only read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This year I changed that by reading Persuasion. Loved it, enjoyed it even more than Pride and Prejudice. And Sense and Sensibility is the other book of hers that I already own, so that is why it's going to be the third book of hers that I read. Then we have a book called Never the Wind. And again, I'm not sure what this book is about. This is one that I bought when I was on vacation in Quebec this past summer. So when I went to the bookstore, I wanted to pick up a couple of things, souvenirs from vacations. So I went and bought a book at the bookstore, which it takes some mental gymnastics to justify that, I think, as a souvenir from vacation. But I managed to do it. I managed to convince myself. And I never picked it up and read it. I can't remember what it said on the back because it's been months since I bought it at the store, but I am going to read it, hopefully, in 2023. After that, we have Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this is the follow-up to Black Sun, which is one of my favorite modern fantasy books. Really loved Black Sun. When the second book, Fevered Star, came out last year, it had mixed reviews initially. I think some people did not end up enjoying it as much as Black Sun, and that made me a little bit nervous. So I just kept pushing it off and pushing it off. But I do really want to read it. I'm not sure when book 3 comes out or if there is a release date for book 3 yet. I will have to look that up and see. But I do really want to get to Fevered Star. After that, we have The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So I really love The Night Circus. I know that's one that, again, at least on the part of BookTube that I spend time on, is pretty divisive. Like some are pretty divisive. Some people really like it, like myself. I love it. Some people really hate it, like Patrick, who I think gave it 1 star and gave it like a rant review, which still hurts my heart, but it's okay. I will still be his friend. The Starless Sea is Erin Morgenstern's second book. It is about, I believe it's about like a story about stories. I think there might be some element of like maybe there's books that tell you about people's lives. I'm not 100% sure. Again, I didn't read up a whole lot about it before buying it, and people haven't been talking about it for a while because it came out a few years ago. I just know that it's by her. I want to read it. After that, we have Lancelot. So I am trying to fill in the gaps of my Arthurian TBR. I made a video, I don't know if it was this year or late last year, about books, Arthurian books that I have not yet read, and Lancelot was one of those. I had been hoping to read it this year, but I just was not able to find the time. But I am hopeful that I can get to it in 2023. After that, we have Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is a book this is number 2 in his Bloodsworn saga, which is his Viking-inspired series. And I just haven't read book 2 because I know I'm going to be sad. Like, I know there's going to be a cliffhanger. I know I'm going to want book 3 immediately. I was very spoiled. I became a John Gwynne fan when all of his Banished Lands saga had been released, and so I could binge through them at lightning speed. And I can't do that with this book, and it makes me upset. So I didn't read it right away, but I do really want to get to it. So this will be a very high priority for 2023. Then we have Kindred by Octavia Butler. So I read Parable of the Sower last year, and I do want to read Parable of the Talents. It's just that unfortunately there was a foreword in Parable of the Sower, and I didn't read it until after I finished Parable of the Sower because I have been burned by these kinds of introductions before. And I thought there could be spoilers for this book because this is a special edition introduction. It is presumed, because this is a classic, you've probably read it before. And so I left the introduction until I was finished the book. The introduction was by N.K. Jemisin. I wanted to go back and read it, so I went back and read it. And unfortunately, there was a really big spoiler for Parable of the Talents, which is book 2, in that introduction. So it kind of bummed me out a little bit, and I didn't really want to read Parable of the Talents right away, and I have not gotten to it yet, but I will read it someday. It's just that I think I'm going to read Kindred first. I've heard really great things about Kindred and would love to read it. So I'm going to put that on the list for 2023. And then the very last book, I can lay down my cue cards and pick up my pen to fiddle with instead. My very last book of 2023 that I put on the list is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, I think is his last name. I have said, it feels like I've been saying this all year in various contexts, but I love Westerns, movie Westerns. I grew up watching a lot of them. I love them. And I just recently read Red Country, loved it. I love The Gunslinger. And Lonesome Dove is one of the most well-known Westerns of all time. It is a book that every person I have seen read on BookTube has loved, adored, and I really want to read it. So this is another one I don't own a copy of, but I may be able to cheat because I'm sure my dad owns a copy. Like he also reads a lot of Westerns. Like, he loves to watch them, but he loves to read them too. So I would be surprised if he doesn't have a copy. It's possible that he had a copy and it fell apart, which has happened to like many of his like pocket paperbacks, but I will check in with him and see if he has a copy. If not, this should be very easy to get from the library. So I will try to do that and, like I said, be responsible about my spending in 2023. But that's it. That is the 23rd book, 23 of 23. Those are a collection of the books that I am going to try to prioritize next year. Please let me know, are any of these books on your list? Have you read any of them? And which books are you most looking forward to reading next year? Thank you for sitting through this. I feel like this was a very discombobulated video, so I apologize for that, but I will see you with another video soon. Bye!